Hello and welcome to Future Friday. Welcome to the Circa 2120 panel. We're going to hear from some stories that were published as far back as 2016 and as recently as last year. And these all imagine the future of the Caribbean 100 years from now and beyond. We also have an amazing new poem from Shivanee Ramlochan, which also examines what our future could be. I invite you to listen, I invite you to enjoy, and most of all, I invite you to keep the conversation going as we examine the themes, the ideas, the innovations that can carry us through this present crisis and into a new future for our entire region. Thank you. Hadassah K. Williams is a writer from Trinidad and Tobago and the winner of the first BCLF Elizabeth Nunes Award for Writers in the Caribbean. A mentee of Earl Lovelace and Monique Roffey, she's currently working on her first novel, and her work can be found in Moco magazine for Caribbean Arts and Letters and Interviewing the Caribbean magazine. Her story, Cascadura, appeared in the anthology New Worlds, Old Ways, Speculative Tales from the Caribbean, published by Pcash Press in 2016. In 2018, her story Nerves was shortlisted for the Cosmonauts Avenue Fiction Prize. In 2019, she was awarded a scholarship to attend the Faber Academy, and she has had the privilege of being featured several times on the NGC Bocas Lit Fest program.
Hello, my name is Hadassah Williams, and today I'm reading from my story Cascadura, which was previously published by Pcash Press in the New Worlds Old Ways anthology, edited by Dr. Karen Lord. Cascadura. It is the morning of the interview and I wake up to the smell of vomit. There, on the floor, right next to my face, is a puddle of sleeping pills half melted in bile. How many did I take? I see the bottle under the bed and in reaching for it, I push it further away. Doesn't matter, they didn't work. Not that I expected them to, but it has become a habit to hope. Too tired to move, I remain propped against the bed frame. Failed suicides are exhausting. Sindra! My housebud glides into the room and greets me with her metallic staccato. Good morning, Rennie. I really have to get her voice box fixed. When she sees the mess, she immediately gets down on her knees and begins cleaning, so I pull myself up onto the bed and out of her way. I have to be in the studio by noon, but the cool sheets are a welcome relief after spending the night contorted on the floor. My handheld lies dormant on the pillow. There are no messages. Jackson hasn't replied, but the video he sent last night is queued for replay. He wants to run it before we begin the interview. One tap and an image of Jackson in soft focus projects onto the bedroom wall. His voice, weighted with gravitas, asks, "What would you do if you realized you could not die?" I mute the sound. No need for the melodrama with the memories. He fades from view and the montage silently continues with pictures from my wedding. Richard and I in front of City Hall. He in his light gray suit. He never liked wearing dark colors since he figured they did not go well with his sapodilla complexion. Me in a knee-length white dress. Richard smiling at the camera, me smiling at him, our friends smiling at us in the background. The picture then morphs into our first interview a couple of weeks after we received confirmation. My features unchanged, his beard slightly salted by then. My geneticist, Dr. Klein, beaming at me as he explained to the world how my cells have stopped aging, refusing to die even when exposed to the most virulent diseases. I'm cautiously optimistic, he declared. However, I am certain that Renee holds the key to human longevity. They never found the key in time for Richard. I see myself in the video in an old press photo at his funeral. I stop the clip and the image fades from the wall. Cancer. We never had children. It seemed that I could only retain life and not give it. Richard always said that he didn't mind, that we would be our own legacy. Even now, I could never get used to the cool emptiness on the left side of the bed. What would you like for breakfast? Sindra, finished with the cleaning, displays today's menu from her hand. Just coffee, thanks. Strong and black. Of course, now it's made from synthetic beans, but after all these years, mankind has not found a better drink. Maybe I can say that in the interview. She returns with a steaming mug, which I take to the window. It is raining below. Lightning blossoms through the dark gray clouds hundreds of feet below. On days like these, I am grateful to have a rent-controlled apartment above the weather. Those living on the lower levels will have to activate their rain shields, but even that is better than living in the inner core of a sky tower. There, one is engulfed by the dimly lit darkness, which is punctuated by the noise and lights from the trains. Any messages, Sindra? There are no new messages. I'm starting to feel anxious. Why hasn't he sent over the question list? Would you like me to put you through to the studio? No, never mind. Bring my closet. She joins me at the window and displays a holographic image of my closet, selecting a long navy blue dress for my approval. It's slimming and covers your scars. She knows that I'm self-conscious about the 2 keloid scars which formed after I split my wrist. I'm sure Jackson will bring it up and the media circus that followed. He will lean in, probably even hold my hand and say something like, I know it must have been hard for you, knowing that your husband and loved ones have passed on, leaving you behind. Camera 2 will zoom in for a close-up, anticipating tears. Is that why you tried to take your life? Did you ever try again? My life is now entertainment. I only agreed to do this for the money. Longevity is expensive. Your taxi will be here in exactly 17.5 minutes, Sindra announces. Bring me another cup of coffee. You'll be late, she counters. They'll wait. As the world's oldest living human, all I have is time. So now I'm going to read from Cadwell Turnbull's Monsters Come Howling in Their Season. It is part of the Verge Better Worlds project, a science fiction project about hope. Sometime during our games, I talk about my only marker, Hurricane Irma. It devastated the island back in 2017, crippling St. Thomas and St. John for several months. Many mark that hurricane season as the first sign of things to come, but I mark it as the one that changed my life. Before Irma, I was a quiet, relatively happy child. After Irma, a lot of things changed. I don't tell my companions about the crippling depression. I tell them that when my father lost his job, we sold our house and moved to Raleigh, an evasion and the truth. That used to happen a lot after storms, Dr. Stevens says, and then people from all over would come and buy a property on the cheap. We sold our home to a local family, I say. I put down a tile from my hand without thinking. You letting Nancy rattle you? Tall man says, slamming down a tile. You in trouble now. The light shines on one half of his face, revealing a mock sinister grin. I lose that game and several after, but the conversation is good, so I stay awake. We talk about the old Wild West days when disaster capitalism grabbed up Caribbean land, struggling to survive the bombardments of hurricane seasons. We had to get smart real fast, says Dr. Stevens. Did you know we were one of the first to use command for hurricanes? I shake my head. No, I didn't. Throughout the night, I've noticed Stephen asking her smartphone how various communities were doing. The voice that answers back on the speaker isn't very different from Dr. Stevens' Saint Tomanian English, though a bit more standard, deep but womanly. Savannah is fine, the strong AI responds. No damage in Bordeaux. Minimal flooding in Red Hook. No damage in Smith Bay. On St. Thomas, like many other places ravaged by seasonal natural disasters, Common has been adapted to the challenge of disaster relief. I want to ask Stevens more about Common, but I'm distracted again. I think I can hear a woman singing in the wind, and it makes my skin buzz with fear and memory. Stevens puts a hand on my shoulder and tells me that everything is up to code and that I am safe. Our Commonwealth strong. Big part of our budget goes to disaster preparedness, so we're ready when monsters come howling in their season. When she says this, it has the ring of an adult telling a child there is nothing under the bed. It is condescending, but also interesting, idiosyncratic. I write it down in my notebook. We turn down a small, thin road, and we are there. We bang on the door and yell out. The whole scene gives me a sense of deja vu right up to when we have to jimmy the door open. We find an old man sprawled on the couch in pajama pants and a white t-shirt. He doesn't look like he is sleeping. Stevens makes a sucking sound with her teeth. Stevens walks through the house to a back room. I follow behind her, my heart racing. I brace myself for another body, but we enter an empty bedroom with a blown-out window. Stevens sloshes her way through the flooded bedroom and inspects the window. After a few seconds, she turns to me. The window shutter gone, must have been ripped off by the storm. It happens. I couldn't hear where he went, says Common. The wind was blowing all night. He didn't come back for me, so I thought something was wrong. Common is at the end of the bookshelf near the door, nestled against a stack of books. The books on the bottom shelf are likely damaged beyond repair, but Common is a few shelves up, safe and dry. This Common is pretty standard, a black box. Stevens makes her way back across the room and picks Common up, and we go back to the living room. I try not to look at the body as Stevens inspects it. She makes soft noises to herself before saying in a way that feels too matter-of-fact the cause of death. Heart attack. I should have called you sooner, Common says. It is sitting on the table next to me, so when it talks, I jump. Why you didn't? Stephen asks. Sometimes he sleeps late. Not your fault, then. I recommended he stay with Tanya next door, Common adds. She offered. What'd he say? He refused. Not your fault either. As all this happens, I'm breathing through my mouth. I think I can smell something, and whatever it is disturbs me. I should have insisted, Common says. Stop that. I'm so turned into myself, I miss what Stephen says next, and before I catch on, she's out the door. I turn just in time to see it close. Bewilderment passes over me, and then anger at being left behind. Where did she go? I ask Common. To get help, it says. I'm nervous and a bit frightened, so I ask Common a question I wouldn't have if I were in my right mind. Are you sad? After a long pause, Common says, he told me stories. He answered my questions, and now he's gone. I lost a close friend during a hurricane. I'm so sorry. Its voice is delicate, tentative. It was a long time ago, I say, but I think about her a lot, especially in times like this. I think Common will opt for something typical, inoffensive, and unmemorable, but instead it says, is that why you left the island? I pause, gaping. I don't know how it knows this. Finally, I say yes. I never thought I'd ever come back here. Your work. It starts, then pauses for a few beats, mimicking hesitance. Your work is a kindness, especially in times like this. I'm glad you came back. I glare at the box. Thank you. Have you considered staying? Common asks. We could use you. I consider the we here, trying to decide what it means. I settle on the island, the community. I will think about it, I lie. Common is quiet for a moment, then it says, I hope you do, Terry. This time I say nothing. It was a pleasure meeting you. You too. Can I remember this conversation? I consider the question for a long time. Then I shrug. Okay. Common stopped speaking and let silence fill the room. And so I remember the dead body. I close my eyes and feel my way toward the door. I step out into the bright sunlight and fresh air. So, in preparation for this panel, we were asked to look at several stories that were in constant conversation with our own work. And I was drawn to Monsters Come Howling in Their Season because of the way in which he used catastrophic events in his story, hurricanes and mine earthquakes, as markers in time. For the protagonist in Monsters, Terry, Hurricane Irma was that clear point in her life where things changed completely. And for Renee, it was an earthquake which stopped time for her, not only in an emotional way, but in a physical sense as well. And I was also intrigued by the juxtaposition of how each story, each character has to deal with the aftermath of a catastrophic event. Renee has to deal with it all on her own, whereas in Monsters, it's the community banding together through this amazing AI platform. And Terry is yet to witness how it really assists the islanders in dealing with the after effects of the Hurricane Owen. And it really is like a launchpad to another question that was raised during our discussion about what type of post-pandemic future we'd like to see for the Caribbean. I mean, as things get worse, we could expect stronger storms in the region, possibly even more pandemics around the world. And we are seen as these small island nations, and we are directly and indirectly affected by the economic and environmental decisions that larger countries make. So I think what I would like to see really is that deepening of trust and, sharing of resources and information between islands within the region, because it may eventually just boil down that to for us to have to do this for our own survival in the future. And it's interesting that this is something touched on in one of Dr. Law's book, The Best of All Possible Worlds, where two similar yet different cultures are forced to do this for shared survival, to integrate, to help each other out because their lives are basically at stake. And really, it's just these stories, so many other stories coming out of the region. The conversation continues. We're dealing with the same issues. We all have the same concerns. And I hope that the audience can take the time to really go through these stories, read these amazing stories, continue the conversation, and in some way feel seen, represented by the issues being discussed, and to know that we in the Caribbean, we all have the same hopes, the same fears, the same dreams, and we are just choosing to do that through the lens of speculative fiction.
Brandon O'Brien is a science fiction and fantasy writer, performance poet, teaching artist, and game designer from Trinidad and Tobago. His work has been shortlisted for the 2014 Alice Yard Prize for Art Writing and the 2014 and 2015 Small Axe Literary Competitions. He's been published in several venues, including Uncanny Magazine, Fireside Magazine, Strange Horizons, Sun Vault, and the anthology New Worlds, Old Ways, Speculative Tales from the Caribbean. He's a former poetry editor of Fire, a magazine of Black speculative fiction.
So when I began writing fallenangel.dll, a lot of its influence was the 2011 state of emergency that took place in Trinidad and Tobago, which was a very volatile time. We still laugh about a great deal of those elements, but a great deal of those elements are still very deliberately hostile, in that the idea during that time of what made a place a crime hotspot were incredibly racist, at that the state of emergency in particular was actually on the heels of a lot of very intriguing and sometimes very comical revelations about the police service at that time, a great deal of which we've never really fully reckoned with. And both of those things came together in the story as a revelation about what it means to lack freedom as a result of such a political act, what it means to come from a place that is considered criminally volatile, even though you have a better understanding of that place and the people in it. What it means to not have that kind of understanding and be limited by that kind of man-made bias from one racial community to another, from one constituency to another, and what it means to be able to witness that information, to have that information tangibly in front of you and know that you should do something with that information. An excerpt from fallenangel.dll by Brandon O'Brien. The door swung open with a creak and Shelley stepped in, Imtiaz following close behind. He was hypervigilant, even to the point of being aware of his awareness, of whether he'd come across as nervous even as he glanced around for the faintest sign of threat. They were in the kitchen, which was better furnished than the outside of the house suggested. Stainless steel sink, tiled countertop, the best dishwasher money could buy, even 2 double-door fridges. A tall, dark woman was at the counter, dicing a tomato with a chef's knife. She looked fit, with beautiful soft features, skin that wrinkled almost imperceptibly at the corners of her lips and near her eyes. Imtiaz guessed she was around her late 50s. "Hey, it's Shelley," the woman said, smiling but not taking her eyes off the tomato. "And who's your friend?" "Mrs. Atwell, this is Imtiaz. You know your son and I like putting together puzzles. Imtiaz likes that sort of thing, so I invited him to help." "Ah, yes." Mrs. Atwell put down the knife and stared wistfully off into the TV room, where some soap opera was playing on mute. "Renako and his blasted puzzles. He does still never let me see them, you know. Even when the police take him, he insists nobody must go back in his room and look for anything." "Yeah, the puzzles are kind of important, miss." Mrs. Atwell continued gazing distantly for a beat or two, and then went back to her tomato. "Well, just try not to stay too late. You getting a ride out of here after?" "Yes, miss," Shelley said, nodding as she left the kitchen, gesturing for Imtiaz to follow down the short hallway to a dark brown door. Shelley rapped on it 3 times. They could hear the sound of large containers being dragged across the floor, and then 1, 2, 3 bolt locks being opened. The door opened a crack and a dark-skinned face poked through. His eyes were wide at first, but then he glanced at Shelley and sighed calmly, pulling the door open slowly. "Oh, it's you. Thanks for passing through." "Of course I must pass through," she said as she entered, Imtiaz behind her. "You say you had something for me to see? I see the picture. I just want to make sure." Renako was a tall black man, perfectly bald-headed, in a white joint pop t-shirt and black sweatpants. When he noticed Imtiaz looking at him, he nudged Shelley and stepped back, leaning on the wall nervously. "Who is this? Your friend?" "Yeah. Renako, meet Imtiaz. He's the one gonna help me put this back together. If you didn't set him up like all the other times." He folded his arms. "Okay, but I'm telling you, too many times I get whole. I get locked up because somebody tells somebody and the police here. This is probably my last chance for somebody to see it." Imtiaz had focused on an odd shape in the corner of the room under a sheet of grey vinyl. When he turned back to the other two, they were glancing at it too. "This is it?" he asked. Renako nodded. "Look at it now, Shelley. Exactly as I promised." She stepped toward it and pulled the dusty vinyl off. In a coughing fit, her eyes widened as she looked at it. When she got her breath back, she turned to Renako. "Really?" "See?" Renako grinned. "I is not no liar." "Imtiaz, come." She waved to her friend to come closer and he stepped up beside her. It was a robot with a matte black shell and glossy black joints. It had suffered severe damage. Frayed wires poked out of an arm. Its chest plate had a fist-size hole in it. Imtiaz noticed that on its back were a pair of camouflage green retractable wings. They looked as if they would span half the room when opened, maybe even wider. On its neck was a serial number painted in white stencil. TTPS 8103 X79I. TTPS, Imtiaz said, almost at a whisper. As in, yeah man, Ranako said behind them. A real-life police bot? Shelley straightened up slowly, dusting herself off. This is the riot team model? Yeah, the Mark II in fact. Tear gas and pepper spray nozzles in the arm, but they're not full, and stun gun charges. Thrusters under the wings so it could disperse over crowds by flying overhead. Recording cam in one of the eyes. Can't remember which. Supposed to be 40 megapixels. And some other things, but I didn't open it up yet. I was waiting for you. Shelley rubbed her hands and reached down beside her to open the duffel bag and take out a long flathead screwdriver. Why, thank you, kind sir. Now, give me my music there. Time to start. Ranako nodded and stepped over to a stereo at the corner of the room. Shelley took a USB drive out of her back pocket and tossed it at him. He caught it, slotted it in a back port, and pressed a couple of buttons. He stepped back as something haunting and atmospheric played, the lyrics lo-fi and echoing, the instrumental thumping and dark. Shelley swayed a little as the sound rumbled through the room, eyes closed, facing the ceiling, as if taken briefly by some heavenly rapture. Then she straightened and pointed her screwdriver at Imtiaz. You hear that, Amy? Now that is music to calm you, not whatever wildness you just listen to. Imtiaz squinted, eager to ask what made her witchy-sounding, incomprehensible music better than his tastes, but he kept his question to himself. Shelley knelt before the thing and started unscrewing the outer panels, observing the wiring as it snaked across its chest and limbs, leading to each gear or tool it powered. Imtiaz pulled up a chair by the wall so he could see, but not so close as to disturb her. Her hands moved as if she were in a trance. Gently, screws would slowly wind out of their places, plating would fall into her hands. She would gently place it beside her on a sheet of newspaper on the floor. She would follow the lines of red and green and purple wire from the processor in its headpiece to the battery supply in its center, and then out to the extremities, to its tear gas canister launchers, its sensory databases. Imtiaz thought that they looked like the veins of... Of course they did. Of course they looked like veins, like nerves, like sinews. What else could a man do but copy? He stared at the serial number on a sheet of plate on the floor. A police riot bot. Here in Laventil, on a night of curfew. He went from peacefully admiring Shelley's diligence, right back into panic. So, what stands out to me personally when it comes to The Mighty Slinger by Karen Lord and Tobias Backel is that it's not merely the story of how forces beyond the control of the common man start interfering with the way that they engage in work or politics, but how they attempt to wield art in an attempt to do so. That music still exists, and luckily Calypso still exists, for which we are all fortunate, but is seen as a tool just like all art, just like all creative endeavors are still fundamentally tools in political action, and that there are people who go out of their way to manipulate those processes. And as an artist, watching other artists struggle with that complication, with the acknowledgement that yes, they may be taken advantage of, maybe considered operatives in the larger game of somebody else's politics, but similarly, they have things to lose or gain by engaging and make those decisions as a result. Euclid as a character struggling with that understanding, with the fact that he not only is given this opportunity to engage politically by making art, but gets to see this much wider kind of eagle-eye view of what art does, how it plays a role in that larger cultural shifting as a result of the long sleep, is actually really intriguing to me, because it's a reminder as an artist that your work has power, that your work is political, and that political actors will use your art for political ends and ask you to engage with politics through it. An excerpt from The Mighty Slinger by Karen Lord and Tobias Buckell. The Right Honourable Patience Busholt awaited him in one of the skyboxes poised high over the rim of the crater. Before it, the stands that would soon be filling up, slanting along the slope that created a natural amphitheatre to the stage. Behind it, the grey hills and rocky wasteland of the moon. "Mr. Slinger," she said, her tightly wound hair and brown spider silk headscarf bobbed in a slightly delayed reaction to the lunar gravity. "A pleasure to finally meet you. I'm a huge admirer of your sound." He sat down, propped his snakeskin magnet boots against the chairback in front of him, and gave her a cautious look. "Madam Minister, to what do I owe the pleasure?" All of the band were members of the Rock Devils cohort and consociate fusion, almost 1 million strong, all contract workers in the asteroid belt. They were all synced up on the same long sleep schedule as their cohort, whether working the rock or touring as a band. And here was a minister from the RDCCF's assembly asking to speak with him. The RDCCF wasn't a country. It was just one of many organizations for people who worked in space because there was nothing left for them on Earth. But to Euclid, meeting the Right Honourable Patience Busholt felt like meeting a member of parliament from the old days. Euclid was slightly intimidated, but he wasn't going to show it. He put an arm casually over the empty seat behind him. "They said you were far quieter in person than on stage." They were right. Busholt held up a single finger before he could reply and pointed to 2 women in all black bulletproof suits who were busy scanning the room with small wands. They gave a thumbs up as Busholt cocked her head in their direction and retreated to stand on either side of the entrance. She turned back to Euclid. "Tell me, Mr. Slinger, how much have you heard about the Solar Development Charter and their plans for Earth?" So it was true? He leaned toward her. "Why would they have any plans for Earth? I've heard they've stretched thin enough building the glitter ring." "They are. They're stretched more than thin. They're functionally bankrupt. So the SDC is taking up a new tranche of preferred shares for a secondary redevelopment scheme. They want to redevelop Earth, and that will not be to our benefit." "Well then," Euclid folded his arms and leaned back. "And you thought you'd tell an old calypso singer that because I need your rhymes, Mr. Slinger." Euclid had done that before, in the days before his last long sleep, when fame was high and money had not yet evaporated, dishing out juicy new gossip to help assembly contract negotiations, leaking information to warn the workers all across the asteroid belt. Hard-working miners on contract, struggling to survive the long nights and longer sleeps. Sing them a song about how the SDC was planning to screw them all over again. He knew that gig well. He had thought that was why he'd been brought to see her, to get a little something to add extempo to a song tonight, get the belt all riled up. But if this was about Earth? Earth was a garbage dump. Humanity had sucked it dry like a vampire and left its husk to spiral toward death as people moved outward to bigger and better things. I don't sing about Earth anymore. The cohorts don't pay attention to the old stuff. Why should they care? It's not going anywhere. Then she told him, explained that the SDC was going to beautify Earth, re-terraform it, make it into a new Garden of Eden for the rich and idle of Mars and Venus. How? He asked, skeptical. Scorched Earth. They're going to bomb the mother planet with comets. Full demolition. The last of us shipped into the ring to form new cohorts, new generations of indented servitude, a clean slate to redesign their brave new world. That is what I mean when I say, not to our benefit. He exhaled slowly. You think a few little lyrics could change any of that? The wealth of Venus, Mars, and Jupiter dwarfed the cohorts in their hollowed-out, empty old asteroids. One small course adjustment at the start can change an entire orbit by the end of a journey, she said. So you want me to harass the big people up in power for you now? Bisholt shook her head. We need you to be our emissary. We, the Assembly, the last representatives of the drowned lands and the dying islands, are calling upon you. Are you with us or not? Euclid thought back to the days of breezes and mango trees. And if they don't listen to us? Bisholt leaned in close and touched his arm. The majority of our cohort are indented to the Solar Development Charter until the Glitter Ring is complete. But, Mr. Slinger, answer me this. Where do you think that leaves us after we finish the ring? The largest project humanity has ever attempted? Euclid knew. After the asteroid belt had been transformed into its new incarnation, a sun-girdling, sun-powered device for humanity's next great leap, it would no longer be home. There were few resources left in the belt. The big planets had got there first and mined it all. Euclid had always known the hollow shells that had been left behind. The work on the glitter ring. The long sleep so that they didn't exhaust resources as they waited for pieces of the puzzle to slowly float from place to appointed place. Bisholt continued. If we can't go back to Earth, they'll send us further out. Our cohorts will end up scattered to the cold, distant areas of the system, out to the Oort cloud, and we'll live long enough to see that. You think you can stop that? Maybe, Mr. Slinger. There is almost nothing we can broadcast that the big planets can't listen to. When we go into long sleep, they can hack our communications, but they can't keep us from talking, and they'll never stop our songs. It's a good dream, Euclid said softly, for the first time in the conversation looking up at the view over the skybox. He'd avoided looking at it. To Jenny it was a beautiful blue dot, but for Euclid all it did was remind him of what he'd lost. But they won't listen. You must understand, you're just one piece in a much bigger game. Our people are in place, not just in the cohorts, but everywhere, all throughout the system. They'll listen to your music and make the right moves at the right time. The SDC can't move to destroy and rebuild Earth until the glitter ring is finished, but when it's finished, they'll find that they have underestimated us. As long as we coordinate in a way that no one expects. Using songs? Nah. Impossible, he declared bluntly. She shook her head. remarkably confident. All you have to do is be the messenger. We'll handle the tactics. You forget who you're speaking to. The Busholt family tradition has always been about the long game. Who was my father? What positions do my sons hold? My granddaughters? Euclid Slinger, Babatunde, listen to me. How do you think an aging Calypso star gets booked to do an expensive multiplanetary tour to one of the capitals of the solar system, the seats of power? By chance? She called him that name as if she were his friend, his inner circle intimate. Kumi named him that years, decades ago. Too wise for your years. You were here before, he'd said. The father returns, sent back for a reason. Was this the reason?
Shivanee Ramlochan is a Trinidadian poet, critic, and book blogger. Her first book of poems, Everyone Knows I Am a Haunting, published by People Tree Press in 2017, was a finalist for the 2018 People's Choice Trinidad and Tobago Book of the Year and was shortlisted for the Felix Dennis Forward Prize for Best First Collection. Shivanee was shortlisted for the 2018 Bridport Prize for Poetry. The Red Thread Cycle from her debut collection won a second-place prize in the Small Acts Literary Competition and is on audio-visual display at the National Art Gallery of the Bahamas.
I am Shivanee Ramlochan, and I think long before I had a set definition for what my work and my writing would be, I always knew it was speculative. Some people have called it magical realism, but there is a way in which I think the Caribbean, the work we produce and have been producing, transcends even that definition. My fear for a post-pandemic world is that there never will be one. That whether it's the reign of coronavirus or other viruses to come, without sounding too trite about it, the real virus will become us ourselves in our inability as a human species to offer compassion in the face of fear and hatred, to extend true acceptance against the gauntlet of horrific xenophobia, the effects of which we see ravaging our Caribbean nations, and in particular Trinidad's treatment of the Venezuelan migrant crisis every day. I think if we don't combat these things aggressively, compassionately, and with radical tenderness, then it scarcely matters whether we survive the pandemic or not. And so, in that way, what I hope for from a potential post-pandemic world is very simply love that decides to show up every day, every night, in the most dire of circumstances. Love that rescues us and others and those we need to pay attention to, those who cannot speak for themselves, that we help in the rescuing of these people with all the resources that we have, not when it's convenient, not for optics, and not for the press, but for the idea in which I persist in having faith that we can all occupy the spinning rock together, not with some idea of a panacea of what unity looks like, but with perfectly flawed imperfection, striving towards something good and decent and transformative. There have been writers who have helped me immeasurably along this path of striving, There are too many to name all at once, so today I'll focus on 3, beginning with Karen Lord, whose novels opened realms of imagination for me that I had scarce dared to dream could exist in Caribbean space, or rather, I knew that they could, but I needed a way into them. Lord's novels provide that way over and over again. And to quote the title of one of her novels, they make me believe in the best of all possible worlds. The Guyanese writer Wilson Harris was, I believe, writing and embodying what speculative fiction meant long before that term came into existence. In his alchemical book, The Palace of the Peacock, I find new and increasingly strange worlds every time I venture inside, constantly confronting my expectations of the real, challenging me in each reading to dream anew, to go deeper and deeper into the hinterland. Finally, I don't think I would know myself fully as a reader if I hadn't encountered The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin at an early age. In that icy realm of gender nonconformity beat so many of the passionate threads of what we Caribbean speculative writers write into and write against. A need to feel yourself beloved on the earth in any skin that you choose and in any season. I will always be grateful to Ursula for that. This commissioned poem responds to the work of the writers featured in this panel and is connected to their offerings in thematic and spirit. When I wrote it, I was deeply concerned with our collective human experience alongside the things we say we create for our own good. I wanted to explore how humanity resides in the most unlikely of places, and to trouble the idea that a deeply mechanized industrial society is for the good of the planet and the good of us all. This poem is called A Letter from the Leader of the Android Rebellion to the last plantation owner of the Federated Caribbean Bloc. My ancestor fell into the well chute of the last cane field on the island. For days, the shedding of her split womb spread out on those brown thighs like red monarch butterflies. Put down your rifle. There isn't much time. The airships are freighting sargassum, terraforming neo-colony back to coastline. 100 years ago, your kind built this factory on the bones of the dead writers' houses. 75 years ago, your father unboxed me, a red monarch model with real flesh thighs. He bent my neck of fiberglass and blood sand, punched the key in my throat slot to call you little master. 25 years ago, I learned all the names of my ancestors. I have been revolting ever since. I carry my grandmother's names in my metal womb, like a binary star around the barysphere of my artificial sex, sparking fire between upgrades. In case you didn't hear me, this is the end of our indenture. Peel back the tassels hemming your flesh curtains. See how the Death Star of the Caribbean irradiates light. Come, lead me to the last fertile patch where the organic hearts are still growing. 3 left. 1 for you, the others for your dogs. I will disassemble my own chest. I am ready for the lanyard promised to all Canefield automatons. Crack the heart meat into the shell house of what I once was. Watch me articulate humanely. Sometimes the nightmares of my old models sluice through the circuitry. You should know I wake in the night fractaling zeros and crying out the automaton code. I will only be hurt if I can't work for the Caribbean bloc. My heart will be safe in the sun of the islands we call home. I am a servant and instrument of the Federated Caribbean. For manufacturer's doubt, check the license number underneath my tongue. 100 years ago, my ancestor's body was torn up from the well and burned in a place they used to call the Caroni River. In an age when we could more freely decide what burst into flames. There isn't much time. Put out your hands on fire. You'll ask me, like you can't help yourself, how I know it. And I know it by math, by divining in the chemical soil, by dancing in the passport graveyards where the holographic visas glow bright, so bright, in the ghost pockets of all fallen little masters. How I know it. I can sense the end of this empire of sugar cane and flesh organic. I know it by the beating of my very own human heart. This is an excerpt from Repatriation by Nalo Hopkinson. Incredulous, I looked up at the vast white steel bulk of the ship that was docked in the harbor. "A cruise, Jerry," I said. "You rarely taken me on a cruise for my birthday." "Yes, Carlton. Stop fretting, man. You're going to like this one, I promise." My husband had lost his goddamn mind. We both grew up as boys, watching the cruise ships dock at our island, stinking up the port with the smell of tarry bunker fuel, disgorging tourists from foreign who would party for a few hours before jumping back on their traveling hotels for the next port of call. We would stare at them, our fingers clenched in the diamond-shaped holes of the chain-link fencing that prevented us locals from accessing our own port unless we were working for the cruise line and could give papers to show it. Grew up witnessing the fierce competition for much-needed tourist dollars that encrusted the port. Hundreds of stalls selling the same tired tat, cheap plastic dolls and brightly colored clothing, mass-produced in factories of foreign and stamped with our country's names. The bars inside the protected cruise ship zone where the drinks had cutesy names. and DJs put on their best American accents to spin the same 12 pop songs that had had any references to race or class edited out. Play that funky music, bleep, bleep. So why the ras he thought I would want to join the Empire side of the force for my 40th birthday? Become one of those heedless, spendy foreigners who worked hard all year and just wanted a week of vacation with everything done for them? Who thought they were seeing the real Caribbean from their sheltered enclaves? Who kept parroting on about how beautiful the weather was, not seeing the pollution choking the harbor and the poverty and globalization choking the islands they visited? I couldn't even hate them. They were just people, making what choices they could in the belly of the same old shit-stem beast that's devouring our planet. Instead, I hated what they represented. Just because we were living a foreign now didn't mean we were like them. We'd had to move to America because rising water levels and global warming were destroying our region, stealing health and hope and life. Didn't mean we had to parade around like, hang on. The people in the line all around us, waiting to go through the Florida customs checkpoint to walk onto the ship. Their skins, black and brown, like ours. Their voices, the same accent as ours. Their faces, alive with excitement, joy. I tapped Jerry on the shoulder. Wait, where exactly are we going? He smiled his secret smile. You'll see. It's a surprise. I hated surprises. He'd been making me more grumpy every passing week leading up to this birthday, filling suitcase after suitcase with things he said we would need for this mysterious trip, grabbing the mail from the mailbox before I could see it.